Hi guys, it's Ben here from T-Rex Space Station. How's everyone doing? And this is a question for you, and the question is, are modern games too easy? Yes, it's a very loaded question, but I'm going to use that statement as a way of being a springboard into a bit of a talking point. Now, I've been playing a lot of Final Fantasy 15 recently, and it's been good for me to break up the long RPG play with some of my old Sega Saturn games. And whenever I turn on the Sega Saturn, I'm taken aback by just how ass-kicking the games are. I mean, I really do get my ass handed to me. And there isn't anything like old games for reminding us how things used to be really difficult back in the day when we were younger. If I think back to my video game heyday, which was really the Mega Drive days back when I was in primary school and early secondary school, I didn't have a lot of money and I wouldn't get a game very often. So getting a new game would be a big deal, and I seemed to have a lot more patience with the video games back then than I do now for sure. The thing was though, the games actually lasted for a long time, and the reason why they lasted for a long time was because they were bloody difficult. You know, if I take games, I can remember when I got Ristar, I remember seeing it in the store that we used to go to called Macro and thinking this is amazing. It's quite a late Mega Drive game, but a new platformer with beautiful graphics. And, you know, I played it to death, but I never beat it because those games were made to be brutally difficult. And I think that part of the reason why they were made to be so difficult was the fact that you couldn't fit a huge amount of data on a cartridge. I mean, you could fit quite a lot, but not endless amounts like you can with the, you know, modern CDs and DVDs and all the rest. So games were made to be incrementally difficult. Usually, if you were lucky, you'd get a lead in where the first few levels slowly increase the difficulty level, but pretty much in my memory and in, you know, modern day playing of these old games, usually by the end, the sort of latter third of the games, the difficulty level gets absolutely absurd and it gets really hard and really challenging. And as a kid, I think I found that very frustrating because very rarely could I ever get to see a lot of the games that I bought, unless I had a level select sheet or something like that, like you had in, say, the Sonic 1 and 2 games. But for the majority of games, I would get to play actually very little of them. But it seems to me that as an adult, I'm a little bit better at those games and I can kind of see how they work. The idea is that you're meant to have repeated playthroughs so that you slowly get better at the early levels. And as a result of getting better at the early levels, you have more lives and more bonuses and more continues and all these other things that mean that the later levels, you get more goes at them. And really the idea is this incremental slow skill build so that you can progress through the games. I think we see that even in Sonic 1, really, where the first few times I played it, I would be making stupid mistakes on the first few levels. But actually, once you start to learn where the secret areas are on the initial levels and where the extra lives are, and getting the bonus stages and stuff, the game becomes more forgiving. It's kind of like you have to know the levels in more detail in order to get further. And, you know, it took practice. It took a hell of a lot of practice. And every time I put the Sega Saturn on, and I love to play these old shmups, I kind of see how things were back then. The games were goddamn hard, and it was really a skill challenge. It was about dexterity and hand-eye coordination and persistence and really having your wits about you. And actually a lot of the time there was very little tutorial or intro. It was just, here's the game, get your skills sorted and you may progress in it. Now obviously there are different types of games, and that's going to affect the question in some ways, you know, but I think a lot of modern games do seem to have this maybe hand-holding you would call it, or sometimes the games are very much automated. I mean, I was watching a video by a guy giving Final Fantasy 15 a bad review, and he was saying how it felt like he was just watching a film, and actually there was very little input from the user. And I think there is a big streamlining process that goes on where the sort of the line between a story and an interactive fiction and a video game is being blurred all the time, and maybe as a whole, video games feel like they're getting a bit easier and more streamlined and more about the experience or the process. I think there are modern games that get this difficulty level perfectly balanced. If I was to take the last game that I finished, which was The Last Guardian, which was an amazing and beautiful game, I actually really enjoyed how barren the game was. Yes, there were little tip boxes that appear and tell you press circle to pick up a barrel or whatever, but for the most part the game is quite unexplained. And you have to go into the new environments and explore them on your own and trial and error things and figure it out, you know, through practice and trial and error. And I really liked that. I liked that it wasn't all completely obviously explained. You had to look for environmental clues and for tips and things like that. So I don't think it's necessarily the case that modern 3D amazing graphic games are always easier, but I think that there can be a tendency there to easing you in or making things more about the process than a difficult challenge. I think the demand for old school difficulty level games is still massively out there, and I think one of the beautiful things about this current gen of gaming is indie games are actually really going back to those old school levels of difficulty and challenge. A game that I'm playing at the moment, Shovel Knight, is a perfect example of this. It feels like it's an old SNES game, and the difficulty level goes along with that accordingly. And so I think that this revival in interest in sort of 16-bit and 8-bit era style video games is just great, and the demand for it is there. And actually the other funny thing is watching videos of Super Mario Maker, because actually the fun videos to watch of that are ones where people have caused made really horrible levels that are ridiculous to get through, or the Rayman Legends challenges that come through. The demand is definitely there for this level of old school challenge, this repetitive, this skill developing type approach to games. But I think that it seems to be that it's only in games that have that retro feel or want to recreate that retro platformer style. Not so much in the modern immersive video games. I talk a lot about Skyrim. Skyrim is a beautiful game with a lot of exploration stuff, but it is damn easy and it's pretty damn hard to die really, and the combat system isn't that advanced or difficult. But it's a beautiful game nonetheless. There are some companies that are making games that seem to stick to truer old school arcadey feels to them, and going along with that the difficulty, particularly if you want to take a look at bullet hell shooters. I think Rising Star Games have made some really great ones like Akai Katana, etc. And I think that the exciting area for me is when games do go forward into modern gen looks and feelings, but take hints and take inspiration from how things used to be. That's kind of my favourite things. So it's not like a complete retro reimagining where everything looks 8-bit. It's modern, it's got slick graphics, but the feeling of the game goes back to that. And there are a few gems in my collection that do that. In terms of platform games, one that I've spoken about quite a lot is Donkey Kong Country Returns. Yes, a modern day game, beautiful looking graphics, looks like it's in the new generation, but also has a lot of old school SNES mechanics and a real hardcore challenge that takes you back to the mid-90s gaming. And that's the perfect spot for me. Games that are modern, that have been revamped, that look beautiful, but that feel in some ways like old school platformers or shooters or whatever, so that you can kind of get that feeling and that challenge that you used to have. I think growing up, now I've come to appreciate challenge more. As I was saying, when I was a kid, it was just actually prohibitive, and I would get to see so little of the goddamn games. But now as a grown-up, because I'm a little bit better, I sort of almost enjoy it. It's kind of like, I like the punishment, I like the challenge of getting a little bit further. And one thing that I've been enjoying recently is using emulators. I know there's a lot of debate about emulators not being pure, and it's not really the same as the original experience, which is true, but actually emulators are another great way of seeing much more of your games than you may be able to do on the original hardware. The Mega Drive has got some notoriously difficult games like Truxton, for example, Shinobi, which gets really hard towards the end. Games that I really love, I'd actually like to see what they look like towards the end, but I've never had the chance to do that. And actually I've been sort of almost unlocking my old Mega Drive games and enjoying them more by using emulators and using some save states, so that if you make a stupid mistake, you can just reload it rather than having to play through it all over again. Now I kind of know that is going against the original intention, which is that, as I said, you're supposed to play through the earlier levels and get better at them and get power-ups, but in this modern age we don't always have time for that. Life is busy and there's lots of demands on our time, and I think that emulators are actually a very good way of unlocking that and seeing more of the games and maybe practicing 1 or 2 bits, because sometimes it is just there's a single boss that you get stuck on, and if you could get past that, actually you'd have a pretty damn good run and go through a lot more. And that's the perfect thing for a save state to help with. Load the game, take another look at what the pattern is, try to memorize it, practice it a few times, and that's stopped that kind of bottleneck where you can't get any further. So I think there's a big role for emulation in old school retro games in terms of helping you see a lot more and do a lot more. So I think it's an interesting question. What do you guys think? Are modern games getting too easy? Do you like old school difficulty, or did you find it frustrating? Do you like the fact that a lot of our new 3D games are a bit more explorative and not quite as punishing as they used to be? And or do you enjoy the games that have a retro feel? And you know, I'm sort of using generalizations here because I know there have been some AAA or big titles that are hard as balls, like Dark Souls, for example. But it's just an observation and a question. So let me know in the comments below, or it'd be great if you guys did video responses. Take care, guys, and I'll speak to you all soon.